episode 2 of the Senteon and CIS webinar series, a deep dive into the CIS benchmarks for Windows workstations and servers. I'm Zach, your host from Senteon, joined by my co-host Rich from CIS, and both of us are joined by our special guest, Roddy Bergeron. Welcome, Roddy.
Hey, glad to be here. Ready to help kick this series off. Talk a little bit about CIS controls, and hopefully somebody walks away with a nugget of information and feels better about where they're at in life. That's where I try to be.
Absolutely, one nugget a day. I mean, that would make this whole series worth it. Roddy is the Chief Information Security Officer for Enterprise Data Concepts. He is a 3-time Cybersecurity Jeopardy winner, a girl dad, and always down for some cybersecurity tomfoolery. So welcome again, Roddy. To kick us off, do you mind just giving a little bit deeper dive into your background and how you got into the cybersecurity space?
Sure. So I was I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Louisiana. I was a country boy, grew up on a farm with cows and pigs and goats. And I was like, what is the exact opposite of that life? So I got into technology. It's literally how I got into it. My first job was working for an accounting firm. I helped kind of build out a sort of early on managed service type solution for them, but also supported their audit teams when we do audits. So I helped audit banks and hospitals and government.
What year was that?
So 2004 through 2000, probably I think 10 was around. So I did that for a few years, and then I was picked up by a nonprofit who started doing some work with the state of Louisiana on some privatization. So I was part of their transition team. So we'd help align technology, and kind of my work in auditing and finance kind of gave me a good overview of like, hey, how do you help merge? How do you help fix some issues? So we privatized 2 of these developmental centers with Department of Health and Hospitals, ended up saving the state of Louisiana something like $45 million a year in services, just through just cleaning things up and streamlining services, things like that. Did that for a few years, and then I was like, I kind of miss being an IT guy, a little bit, and being in tech.
Don't know how often that is said.
Yeah, I miss the game, I guess a little bit, and I decided that I would get back in the game, and I was looking around, and I happenstance bumped into the sales guy for Enterprise Data Concepts, and we started talking a little bit. He's like, "Yeah, we're trying to wrap our heads around this recurring revenue model, and why I don't get it." And we're just like, "All right, well, I'll come in." So I came into Enterprise Data Concepts as their director of operations and started turning things around. Created recurring revenue models for them. Just basically built out what we have now. Took them from 1.2 to probably a little bit over 3 million a year over the last few years. With no additions in staff and things like that. Like the same number of staff we had 5-6 years ago whenever I started doing this. So it's
sorry.
Yeah, and and then through my work in auditing and all that, like kind of had a taste for cybersecurity. So I was really like nose to the grindstone, started doing learning a lot more, especially how it affected small businesses, right? Because I came from a larger nonprofit with like 900 staff. So you mean like you had it was more enterprise than anything, or medium business. And I was like, all right, so how do I get an 8-person law firm to accept cybersecurity standards
and take it seriously?
Yeah, and take it seriously. and that's how I kind of fell in love with CIS controls. Kind of was a natural fit for me. So I've been using them for the last few years, building our cybersecurity stack, aligning it to CIS controls, and making the world a little bit better place.
That is awesome to hear, and love that you chose CIS as your framework. Every MSP and every business needs to choose at least one. Yeah. I think in this room, we're rooting for CIS.
Yeah, we're definitely pulling for them.
Awesome. And just to kind of kick off with the agenda today, we're going to do just a little bit of industry news, what's been going on. I know everyone who's joining us is probably stepping away from a pretty big move IT, CVE coming out. So we are very appreciative for everyone who's joining us today. But before we get into the password policy topic, diving into the MITRE attack techniques, a breakdown into each of the 7 CIS benchmarks, let's first kind of hear from Rich and Roddy. I know both of you just went to the PAX 8 trade show. Rich, this was your first one. Could you kind of share what it was and CIS's role?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Such good vibes at the PAX 8 conference. The PAX 8 team just did an amazing job with content, the venue, and it was just the perfect size. Everyone was really happy to be there and to learn. PAX 8 announced some really exciting things coming to their dashboard. and things like that. There was a lot of CIS buzz at the show. PAX 8 or CIS controls were mentioned multiple times on the big screen by PAX 8, by Pillar, by other people. There was like 16, I think, breakout sessions total, and 2 of those were on CIS controls. So,
That's
pretty
awesome.
awesome.
Yeah, and they introduced too, as part of their new marketplace, the ability to map products to CIS controls, so that you can see your tool set. And I talked with some PAX 8 folks after that, and they said, yeah, you'll be able to import products that they don't sell and map them yourself to CIS controls, so you can actually use their platform to help map your products and everything to CIS controls. So I thought that was pretty neat.
That got tons of applause. People are super excited about that.
Yeah, that's been a lot of work. I know. Shout out to Matt Lee out there. I know he's been preaching CIS controls for a long time, and he's getting some traction there. So yeah, he's
one of the highlights for me is I was able to grab a picture of Matt Lee on the big screen and post it on my LinkedIn. So that was a highlight for me too.
Ask him what happened to his badge when you see him. So
no, that sounds really cool, hearing about PAX 8 mapping solutions even outside of their stack to CIS. I mean,
yeah,
Senteon definitely is going to be looking into that. Might have to ask you for some introductions after this.
Yeah, that was one thing I saw. And I was like, man, it'd be great if we could map in there like it's coming. They're like map non-PAX 8 products. Like they're focused. They're taking security seriously for us. And that I have to applaud them for that. Like they've really been pushing the envelope, and what we like to call, like, where's the floor at for an MSP? Like, what do you call yourself an MSP? And I think this we're starting to see, like, what's the baseline, right? Like, you can't just hang a paper sign outside that says MSP anymore. And we're starting to get to that point, right? Like, self-regulation as an industry has been one of my advocacy points for a while. Like, we need to self-regulate. We don't need an entity that doesn't understand us to come in and be like, this is the rule of the land. Like, I got insurance agencies that are clients. I love them to death, but I don't need you guys regulating our industry. That's like, I love them to death. I say it with the most sincereness that I get the insurance game, but I think we have a possibility here we can self-regulate.
Yeah, one of the quotes that I heard at the PAX 8 conference, which I liked, was, "We don't need more security. We need better basics."
Yeah.
I think that's very true.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes like, we can't add more tools, we can't add more. This is that you can't kill a wave with another wave. You just have an endless ocean, right? And like that's been one of the quotes that I keep in mind when we start talking about, like, man, we need more security. It's like, we can't just keep doing. Yeah, we gotta do the basics. We can't just keep adding tools and everything else.
Yeah.
We have to have something more substantial.
I hear this all the time. Obviously, with what this webinar series is focusing on is the basics, the CIS benchmarks, the hardening in OS, hardening the 365 apps. I mean, all of that scope. And yet there's still conversations I'll walk into for a Senteon sales meeting. It's like, hey, we have an EDR. If anything happens, we're taken care of. Why should I take this seriously? Why do I need another security solution?
Because you probably have endpoints you don't even know about. That's why.
Asset management. I think that's one of the controls. Is that right, Rich?
Yeah, we're doing an onboarding right now for a fairly large law firm, and it's like, all right, what do you guys have? And we're finding things left and right. So taking it back to move it, right? If I don't know that my client has external facing move it server, right, and it's not in my inventory, how do I mitigate that? Like the first, yeah. I mean, like we look at the CSF framework. Like the first things identify, right? Identify your people, your assets, your technology. Like you have to identify everything first.
Yeah, spot on.
And that's
an awesome introduction, explaining the real recent trends, what's going on with the MSP community. Let's dive a little bit deeper into today's topic with benchmark section 1.1 password policy. Rich, I think you're going to be the right person to kick us off. I mean, why is password policy part of the CIS benchmarks? What's so important about a password? We all know what it is, but what makes it so important?
Yeah, clearly the obvious. It's some of the keys to the kingdom, and hackers are trying to get passwords so they can get access. And you may think that, well, I don't have sensitive information on my machine. I don't have to worry about it. But the bad guys will take your password and escalate privileges and use techniques to find data in the organization. And so it's really key. And, I think there's a lot of balance that people have to consider in terms of size and frequency of rotation and things like that, because you don't want to overwhelm your users, which leads to bad practices. If you want them to have a 30-character password and change it every month, it's untenable for people, and that also creates bad policy too. So it's really a balance and very, very critical.
Yeah. And this balance, I think this is a perfect transition to you, Roddy. Obviously, being that MSP, Chief Information Security Officer, when you talk to your clients or even prospecting new clients, I can't imagine many of them have an existing password policy. What's that transition like? How do you get them to take it seriously? Is there pushback, or do they just accept they need a 14-character password length?
You ever try to bathe a cat before?
I've seen cartoons of the subject.
Yeah. I mean, like, so we set a high expectation with our clients of like, hey, there's gonna be some changes, right? They're for the better. And we deal a lot with attorneys, right? Like legal is our first. That's I know a lot of MSPs don't want to touch them, but that's our bread and butter. And we one of the things that really resonates with attorneys is you talk about defensibility, right? Because we deal with both plaintiff and defense attorneys, and the first thing we talk about is like, we're here, we want to defend your business, right? And part of that is adopting these policies that you may have some pushback from your staff and your partners, but at the end of the day, this is a small part of what we do, and it's needed. And when we set that expectation of like, we can't have these one-offs because that lowers your defensibility. And I tell them, like, I've been to court, right? I've been to court. I've had to defend these practices before, and I can't look at a juror of 12 people and they say like, well, why didn't you have a solid password policy? Why weren't you following this? And you just be like, I don't know, I just don't like it. Like that doesn't work with jurors or a judge. So like we talk about that, right? We talk about these real world scenarios. Like naturally, human beings are storytellers, right? Like we love stories. It's tribal. It goes way back to the cave drawings and everything else, right? Like, and you tell them a story and you apply to real world scenarios, and you make it, you attach it to something that they're familiar with, and there's like, oh yeah, this does make sense. So yeah, we do get pushback. I'd say that. Yeah,
if you tell your customer and say, hey, consider the possibility of you having to explain your policy in court.
Yeah.
Hopefully they never will, but hey, that's worst case scenario, and we should always prepare for the worst case scenario. So would does your policy stand up in something like that?
Yeah, and we tied back to risk management a little bit. Like, hey, could be the difference in a civil suit between needing to shell out $300,000 and shelling out $30,000, right? Like a civil suit, barrier, like preponderance of evidence, right? It's a lower barrier than criminal court, but this could be the difference between a large chunk of money and a little bit, right? Civil, you're probably always going to pay something in some way, shape, or form, but you tie it back to dollars, right? Like they understand dollars, and that's we try to do it, especially when there's a lot of pushback. Most of our clients are like, whatever, like go change them or whatever, and they just get it. But the ones who really have a problem, we really start tying it back to that.
That makes sense, and I love that you keep saying defend. So really, to wrap up this topic before we head into the MITRE attack techniques, when you say defend their password policy, I mean, are you bringing the hardened GPOs a report? I mean, how are you, if they do have a password policy, how are you proving that they have one? And is this a real scenario? Might this happen?
Yeah, I mean, with anything, right? Like coming from an auditing background, you have to have your policy that says, like a written policy that says, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And then you have to attest to that, right? So like, how are you enforcing it? Can you prove you've been enforcing it, right? Like, we have a tool that goes in and does automated password resets on all of our administrator accounts and everything else. And it logs that. It says like this password was changed on this date. And, we can actually go back and log it. So that's the whole point of it. Like you have a written policy that says whatever, but how do you enforce it? And can you attest to it, right? And we can always go pull AD information and say this last time the password was changed, yada, yada, yada. Like that's always in there. But policies are two parts. The what we're going to do and are we actually doing it?
Are you actually doing it? Showing that current state. That's the important part. Yeah. The biggest thing that's asked for us over at Senteon is showing that change history, being able to prove the real-time status. And I don't think
That's
that
what I was
topic's
gonna
going
say. It
away
sounds
anytime
like you're
soon.
describing Senteon.
Yeah, that'd be my next question. Like, Senteon's gonna have to log this. Is that something that Senteon does, like logging and everything else?
Absolutely. The plugs are great, guys. Keep them coming. But let's definitely keep it going to the MITRE attack technique. So going to our next slide, if you don't mind pulling that up. What are the consequences of having a weak password policy? I mean, on the screen here, we have some MITRE attack techniques, and in my opinion, kind of the 6 most common that a password policy can really mitigate. I know phishing's on there, and I'll get into why that's on there. But Roddy, I mean, do you talk about MITRE attack techniques? Does the end client ever hear of the term brute force? I mean, do you well, one, do you recognize these, and 2, do you talk about them?
Oh yeah. So phishing off the bat, right? All of our clients know about phishing, right? We send out our phishing emails. They get caught in them pretty regularly, and we have a lot of fun with those. But like we have tools. I mean, like if you're not monitoring like your Office 365 for the amount of like brute force logins and things that go on, especially if you don't have geo IP lock, right? And you just
and if you don't mind, Roddy, can you define brute force for the listeners here?
Yeah, that's where someone just attempts every single character they can to get into an account, right? So like if you have a password of cat, they're probably going to get that one pretty quick, right? That's why you enforce things like complex long passwords. Helps prevent against brute force, someone just guessing it, right? It's going to be extremely hard for someone to guess a 28 character randomly generated password, right? Until we have quantum computing, right? Like this isn't going to be trivial for someone to figure out.
Yep. And I know we kicked this off talking about the phishing, because phishing is an email sent. You don't need a password policy to receive an email. So I wanted to really explain why I included this one, or why we included this one on this slide, is because when a phishing email may be successful, what they're actually getting is those usernames and passwords. That way they have more of an arsenal to, hey, I'm going to try this combination here. I'm going to try this combination here. And that's going to be one of those tactics like credential stuffing. So even though password policy doesn't mitigate the risk of that email coming in, it's protecting that sensitive data and those sensitive passwords from being used into a massively generated database of just trying millions of passwords every few minutes. I mean, it's insane how automated all of this is.
Yeah. We had got called into an incident response scenario because our attorneys will call us and be like, something bad happened. And the best that we could guess, because it had been so long, was that they got caught in a phishing scam. User credentials dumped, or they got access to their credentials. There's the same username and password they used to log into their VPN, so they got access to their VPN as well. Because that's one of the things you got to watch out for, right? Is reusing passwords across the board. Like that's. I mean, we've seen bank accounts and various other things get access because people like to reuse. They like to have that one password they remember, right?
And not to chime in on a popular story, but you brought up VPN and password reuse. I mean, is this related all to the good old Colonial Pipeline?
Yeah, that's an interesting white paper to read. Like look, at the end of the day, they could have done better password hygiene. I mean, they had all kind of other things they could have done, like MFA, and they could have segmented their VPN to a separate network and did some better monitoring. But like, it was either compromised or reused credentials, right? That someone used and got access to it. I mean, and when did that happen? Like my buddy who lives in North Carolina was like, guys filling up gas cans for days, like trying to get gas, and it caused a whole slew of infrastructure issues, right? No one knew if they could fill up their vehicle, and all because of a password policy potentially, and a little some of the basics, that could.
The effects are real.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the other one on here, password spraying. Maybe they don't have an arsenal of real passwords and usernames taken from that environment through a phishing email, but this is just another long list, just an automated process trying millions and millions of different combinations. I mean, it's not taking these bad actors a lot of time to do this. It's pushing a button, right?
If you think of how quickly,
as well as using artificial intelligence to augment the process.
Yeah, and if you think of how quickly you can do this via like an API or PowerShell or like that you can spray passwords relatively quickly, shut it down, move to a different IP address, and not even trigger your password policies, right? Like account lockouts, things like that. Like password spraying is designed to avoid account lockouts. So you may never
Plug
know this
for-
is going on. Yeah.
Plug for next week, account lockout policy with Rafi. And talking about getting in and not knowing, I mean, one of these on here is valid accounts. So I mentioned EDR and antivirus, reactive security solutions. But once the bad actor or whomever is inside the account looking like a valid account, I mean, what's the MSP supposed to do? What's that end user supposed to do to get them off? I mean, Roddy, I don't know if you can expand on that, but how mission critical or substantial is it once there is a valid account that's not actually the user?
Can I add one thing before
Yeah.
Roddy responds? The average time for a bad guy to get in, for a bad actor, once they're in and entered, it takes an average of 84 minutes once they're in for them to do damage or exfiltrate data. 84 minutes. So how good are you at threat hunting?
Yeah, and then sit on the network for months. I mean, I was at CNMC Day, and they were talking some of these breaches. They're on the networks for 700 days before they're detected. I mean, like that's on the extreme side, but like they're using valid account. And what are you doing? Are you really tracking end user behavior to the point where you're like, that's odd? They're connecting to websites. I mean, there's some things you can do. There's EDR.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's DLP.
Not everyone has those tools though.
Yeah, and they're hard to maintain and configure sometimes.
Spot on. And the last one on here, Kerber roasting. I don't know if everyone in the audience maybe has heard of this one, but Roddy, could you dive a little deeper into that one?
Yeah, so Kerber roasting is sort of like if you ever heard of golden ticket attacks, things like that. So you're basically intercepting some of the responses in the Kerberos handshake, which is if you don't understand the Kerberos handshake, neither do I. It's extremely complex. There's probably some people way smarter than me who understand it thoroughly. But you're intercepting some of the tickets, some of the authentication tickets that are coming in through Kerberos handshakes. And then you're taking those offline because they're encrypted, but sometimes they're weakly encrypted. And you're going to try and crack those and get access to either credentials or a token or something like that, so then you can continue to act like you're that user, right? Because if you have that access token, you can impersonate that user as much as you want. You're fine.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I mean,
these is important. You're saying.
What's that?
So account validation is important.
Yes, account validation, strong encryption, and again, a lot of EDRs, you're especially some of your better ones, can help, figure out these attacks too, and since those attacks, Kerber roasting is a fairly common attack. I would say it's fairly well known, I should say.
Yep.
And so they should be able to detect things like that, like, hey, the same token was used from two different workstations, or was intercepted or something to that effect, because it's happening usually on the workstation itself. Like you have to have access to the workstation first before you can do Kerber roasting. From what I understand, I've never had to actually
I believe
figure this out. But yeah, but again,
fortunately, we haven't had to.
yeah.
No, that's a great description of all of this, and kudos to you talking about some of these attacks with your prospects and end clients, because I do work with a lot of MSPs, and there's a big transition going on in your guys' space where MSPs now are becoming almost forced to become MSSPs, security service providers.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I like to use the term security focused MSP.
Sure.
I wouldn't call myself an MSSP. I mean, you call yourself whatever you want, but like there's we have to be a lot more security focused. We have to understand these things. So we have to be able to talk to a client in a way that's not technical and where they understand the risks and what's going on. And once you establish, it's a little tough at first. Once you establish that trust, I mean, you can just really tell them whatever and just like run with it. Like when you get to that level, that's when that's when you're good and you've done a great job of explaining to your client and developing that trust with them.
There was a little debate at PAX 8 about MSP versus MSSP.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I made a joke about it. I was like, yeah, MSSP is easy. Just slap on an S to your name. And that joke did not fly over well with some people.
That was kind of the point of the controversy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in the don't call yourself an MSSP unless you're offering SOC services yourself kind of camp. But again, you can be a security focused MSP like us, and,
sure.
and that's great.
Absolutely. And the right path. I mean, you never know what you guys will become, but you're learning it, you're doing the right things, and gives you room to grow.
Yeah, exactly.
So very cool. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes, going into the CIS benchmarks individually. So there are a lot of aspects to your password policy that you can do to improve it. And CIS benchmarks are outlining this with their benchmark policies. So before we go too in depth, I want to first share an additional resource that CIS has, and I'll drop this in the comments after the presentation. So let me just share my screen really quick. And we're going to go right window here. Right. All right. So CIS benchmarks have a password policy guide. So this is going to go a little beyond of the scope today. But Rich, do you mind kind of introducing what this is?
Yeah, sure, Zach. Thanks. So this is something we put together. It's hasn't been updated in a little while, but I think it's still pretty current. We've done a couple iterations of it, but it's kind of a companion guide to the benchmarks and controls, and just gives you maybe a little bit more overall view and context about password in general. Gets into things like MFA, and it kind of explains a little bit about what the benchmarks are trying to accomplish. So I encourage anyone to, it's a pretty quick read, but it's a nice thing. It's something you could even share with customers that, if you're trying to encourage them to affect change in their password policies, this could be a leave behind, and it would help them maybe recognize the importance too.
Absolutely. And this talks a little bit about the MITRE attacks as well. So
Does
definitely a good document to look at. Diving into the topics today, so we will be talking about the Windows Workstation and Server CIS benchmarks. So we will be focusing on 1.1.1 all the way to 1.1.7 with storing reversible passwords using reversible encryption. So just as a heads up, we are talking about the CIS benchmarks, but the CIS benchmarks is a strong foundation for the way other regulated frameworks or best practice frameworks are creating their mappings. So as you can see here in the Senteon database, these settings are not just related to CIS. They're 853, CMMC, FFI, IEC CAT. I mean, this is, being told to zoom in. This is all the way across the board valuable to be doing for your MSP, no matter the space you're in. So with that said, I will go ahead and stop sharing screen, and let's dive a little bit deeper into those benchmarks. So the first one we're going to talk about is ensure enforced password history is set to 24 or more passwords. I will note GPOs can sometimes get a little confusing and a little misleading. But Roddy, could you kind of talk about what it means to have 24 or more password history? Because I don't think I want to save my passwords, right? So why would I want this?
Yeah. I think this goes back to a little bit of password reuse, right? Like, if I reset my password, or if I have a password that's been part of a breach and I reset it, why would I go back to that password, right? And I can tell you right now, playing on the dark web a lot. I don't know if this is being recorded. I don't know if this is going to hurt me in future court cases. Playing around the dark web a lot, you see these password lists, and there's people associated with it, usernames and passwords and everything else. So, if they decide to go after you, right, and they have a password from 8 years ago that you're now reusing because you've gone through a bunch of password reuses, it's now a valid login, right? Yep. So don't think it goes away just because you didn't use it 8 years ago. Like, those things stay out there for a long time. And
that goes into the password spraying MITRE attack technique we were talking about. These passwords that are compromised at one point in time, the attackers don't forget. They just add it to the database. I mean, is that accurate?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, reuse is something that is a serious issue. And we talk about that in the benchmark. The benchmark will specifically tell you what the setting is about. In what I really like about the benchmark is it'll give you rationale on, okay, why is this important? And the rationales are pretty good. And Roddy actually nailed it on the password length. Is many times with shorter passwords, people will tend to reuse them or just do a slight variation. Or, the third time in a row, they go back to they use 3 passwords and cycle through them. And that's just not a good plan. And shorter passwords seem to encourage that kind of usage pattern more often than a long one.
Yeah. Or you get people who they just append the year to the end of their password, and it's like that's not. I made a joke one time. I was doing a security panel, and I made a joke. They were talking about salting passwords, and I was like, "Yeah, salt all my passwords with the current year and an exclamation point at the end of it." And it's just people were just like, "Geez, guy, like
you got my password."
Right.
So there's a list of like the top 20 passwords used in general, and it's a known list. You know, I couldn't tell you what they are, but the bad guys know what they are. And if you're using one of those passwords, you might as well not have a password.
Yep. On the handout in the comments, I do have the number one password. Password 123 is actually the most common password.
So that's going to get tried. You know, hopefully no one's doing that. But
I wish I could remember the password. But we used to go audit AS400 systems, and I just walk up to the console and log in because no one ever changed the console login for AS400.
The default, yep.
And I just walk. I walked into a hospital one time, sat down. I was like, "Oh no, you never changed your password," you know. So yeah,
don't have to be a hacker to know the default password.
No, you know, like that. That's one of the things. Like, you know, I can't tell you. I picked up a client a while back, and their current IT guy was just ghosted them, right? And he wouldn't answer anything. They were like, "We can't get into our systems," and they were like, "Does anybody have the domain admin password?" They were like, "No," and I was like, "Gorilla426." And we walked out and we logged in. I was like, because this guy uses that same password across all of his clients. And I was like, we got in and we were like, they were like, y'all the smartest guys in the world. I was like, no. We just, you know, I just knew this guy's password.
I mean, that is an incredible story. And the worst thing about it is that's a more common story than just your one experience. I mean, is there anything that you could say to, like, how do we move away from that? I mean, we're doing webinars, we're doing community events, but like, is there ultimately any other ideas? What can we do as a community to make sure this isn't happening?
Yeah, education. I mean, just raising the bar, right? You know, there's a saying of, you know, rising tide raises all ships, but you know, the famous addition to that is, and anybody anchored to the floor just drowns, right? You know, like, and that's I mean, that's where we have to be as an industry, right? Because this is going to keep happening and it's going to keep going on, and we're gonna, you know, like, we're going to be looked at as just, you know, this is as a poor industry, like the MSP side, if we do not do better, right? And do better for the sake of doing better, right? Of raising the tide, and not just like, I can, you know, we all want to make more money, right? Like,
sure.
I'm very pro making more money, but we still have to have
these are basics. You know, these are basics. They're critical. Basic. You know, it's important stuff that people just need to recognize. And, you know, I think there's still many instances of the password on the sticky pad sitting on the bottom of the monitor, you know, on the bottom of the desk. I mean, that's real, you know, and you know, people can use that. You know, malicious actors inside of the organization can take a picture of that and share that outside of the organization.
Yeah.
So let's head over to the next CIS benchmark. Ensuring maximum password age is set to 365 or fewer days, but not 0. First of all, but not 0. CIS does explain this in their benchmarks. Effectively, what that means is there is no minimum password age, just like the Microsoft default has it as in a Windows workstation and server. But Rich, I mean, Rich and Roddy, I mean, how often do you guys see the default Microsoft configuration still in place when you pick up a new client or sell, in Rich's case, work with a new MSP? I mean, how often is this not configured?
Often.
Very often. Or we see misconfigurations where it is set to 0, or, you know,
intentionally set to 0 without knowing what it means.
Or someone has a policy set and couldn't figure out why, and then the owner complains, so they went and checked all the, you know, the boxes in Active Directory for each user account that says password never expires. So you have a policy, but then you override it in the user account, right? Like, I've seen that so many times. That they don't know what the enforce reversible encryption or something.
Oh,
like
that's coming up.
So they turn it on because they're like, yeah, I should be able to reverse the encryption. But it's like, do not do that. That's not what that means. You know. So, but yeah, you know, and this is one of those things. Maximum password age. You're gonna see people debate about a lot, like what's too much, what's too few, because you do it too often, and then you run into the reuse thing, right? Or people don't put a whole lot of heart and soul into their passwords. They got to do multiple password resets because they forget their passwords. But you set it too long, and if someone gets on your network, how long are they gonna stay on your network before you force a password reset, right? And you throw in things like MFA in there, and people are just
Yep.
like, well, if you MFA, you don't have to reset your password. I'll tell a story, right? Because I have tons of stories about an MFA failure with someone. I will call them enterprise data concepts because it happened to us.
This is a very real story, everyone.
This is a slew of just bad choices that, and I caught it during an audit. But our firewall, we updated it. There was a setting that was basically had some new security function. We were like, oh yeah, I want to do this. Checked it off, did some testing. Everything was beautiful, right? MFA worked on all of our servers in our data center. I ran through all the checks I could. Like, this thing's worked beautiful. Didn't know that on our terminal server, whenever it was installed by our engineer, they set it to fail open, right? So if it can't contact, we use Duo. Didn't contact Duo servers, we could still get access to it because we need our terminal server, right? And if this is minor, right? Like, services will be down for a day or two, and if the internet's out in our data center, then we're not getting access to the terminal server anyways, like, et cetera, yada yada yada. Like, we rationalized it, right? Well, guess what happened? An update to the firewall started blocking Duo requests. So I could get in through remote desktop, like the remote desktop gateway VPN services, but the Duo prompt would fail open because it couldn't contact the Duo server. So
just went
if
for it.
if I was an attacker, right, and I noticed MFA was down and I had a password list that I knew was pretty active, I could have gone in and bypassed MFA. So we talk about like controls, compensating controls, and overlapping controls, right? This is part of overlapping controls, right? I want to reset a password quick enough where if I do have someone who gets in, I can kick them out, right? Or that password change forces, some issues with them. But at the same time, I got to watch that I don't put it too often, or I don't cause myself other headaches with users and staff, right? So there's some things there, right, that you have to be careful for, because you can't always rely on a single control to help you, like with MFA.
And that's an incredible dark side of the story of a real incident. But one of the things that I run into in a lot of my partners is having this need to start documenting and improving. So could you share the happier side of that story, the lessons learned, what you've done different? Is there more documentation going on, or what's the happy ending?
We don't use fail open anymore. And that was just one of the things where we had never talked about it, right? And we rationalized it as part of our rollout of it, and we're just like, yeah, that's fine, and like never went back and did like control review or anything else like that, and just never caught it. It took an audit of me being like, let me check this month, I'm going to check MFA, and I was like logged into that RDP server, like it didn't prompt me, and then I found a few other issues during this audit, but like the manual review of your controls, right? That's something that not a lot of people do. A lot of people don't have the time, and I get it. And this is a full-time job for me to do auditing and things like that. So manual control review or testing of your controls.
Let me give the CIS controls a plug here too, because the CIS controls actually say use unique passwords is one of the controls, and what we recommend is an 8-character password or greater if you're using MFA. If you're not using MFA, minimum 14-character password. And there's a second control, and it actually falls in IG too, but depending on your data and your posture and so forth, we do have a control that ensures all accounts have an expiration date. So, by following the CIS controls and measuring your posture against what we recommend, you can help solve some of these issues.
Yeah, and that goes a little bit back to baselining too, right, Zach? Like, hey, I gotta have this is where I need everyone to be, and it's okay to have get something outside the baseline, but sometimes you have to like roll it back in, right? Get them back in the box. Is what we call it, right? And that's baseline. Like, you have to make sure, and anything that falls out of that baseline scope or that scope of that baseline, right? It has to be documented. It has to go through the proper channels to change manage stuff. So it is okay, right, for something to fall outside of a baseline, but it's not something you really want to do.
Correct.
But at least you have something, right? You can
and if you are following outside of the baseline, you need to document that.
Yes.
So you have that defensible audit trail in case something bad does happen and you're called to task for whatever reason. We did we had a 3-password, and it was cat because of that was Zach's favorite password. We needed to do that.
Thanks for that one. You could have used a hypothetical name.
No, my point is you can just document that exception and have that defensible proof.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that audit trail is important. So
Yeah.
being able to document change tracking and an exportable report, absolutely. So diving into the next setting, it's actually the flip side of exactly what we're talking about. It's ensuring that minimum password age is set to 1 or more. So I don't want to dive too far into this because we just did this with the exact opposite. But Roddy, if I can put you on the spot, what would if you were coaching an MSP looking to get into the security space, add that extra S or just become security focused? You have a recommendation between 1 and 365, what you would encourage an MSP to try to get to or just do out of the gate?
Yeah, so like for minimum password age, yeah, definitely. Like we said it, I think ours is like 5 days or something like before you can reset it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So what you don't want to have happen, right, is if you set it to like no time frame or zero, which this happened at the accounting firm that I worked at.
It's the default configuration.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
someone would reset their password and they figured out if they reset it enough times they could get back to their regular password. So they just kept doing that. So like it's a moot point. Like why have a requirement to say, hey, you have to have unique passwords. You can't reuse passwords, but then have someone just go cycle through it immediately and just get back to their regular password, right? Like that was
right back to cat.
Yeah, you're right back to cat. So yeah, so you said to a day, we set it to 5 days just so that someone can't go in because like no one's gonna sit there, especially if your password policy is like 24 passwords remembered, and you set to 5 days and your password policy is like 90 days every time you reset your password 180. Like no one's going to sit there every 5 days and reset their password so they can get to that mark. That's something you have to think about too. Your password policy, how long your passwords are valid for, your password history, and how long before they can reset a password, which is a minimum password age. Like do the math, right? Like
yep.
do the math on that and just make sure that you're not contributing to like, oh, I can remember 24 passwords. I set it to a day, but then I have a 180-day window before my password expires. Well, I might go once a day when I log in and go change my password, and within a month I'm back to my regular password, and then I have 5 more months with that password. So your whole password policy is a moot point sort of at that point, right? So
that's a very interesting perspective, and that's challenging for an MSP to really handle. I mean, if you have someone really fighting security, sometimes they can win,
Yeah.
you gotta be careful with your choices.
And sometimes you have to pull old Sally from HR into your office and explain to her why that's not a good. Like that was I'm protecting Sally's name and position in the company.
Oh, we're still on a real story.
Yeah, it's a real story. I'm just protecting the name. You have to call her in and just sit there and be like, hey, here's what happened. This is why you
no hypotheticals with you, Roddy. You've seen quite a bit.
I worked in government. I've seen a lot.
No, I love that. So we still got about 4 settings to get through, about 15 minutes left. So going over to the next one, minimum password length. Rich talked about this. The recommendation with CIS is 14 or more. And if you do have MFA, it's still 8 or more. I don't want to spend too much more time on this since we do have more, but Roddy, are you a proponent of 14 or more? Do you usually start at a lower? Just talk a short little bit on this.
Yeah, so it depends. So for Active Directory accounts, right? We set a minimum of 12. We work slowly. Our minimum was 8 a few years ago. Whenever I started following like CIS controls, I was like, all right, we got to start slowly boiling that frog a little bit and bumping them up. The reason is our clients have password managers. So Active Directory, they can't always access their password. It doesn't copy and paste. So we try to find that fine line. But once they get access to their password manager, we're just like minimum 20 characters, right? Because like it's a copy and paste and random at that point. So like, what's the deal? So it depends on the situation, right? But yes, the minimum password length, right? You don't want something too short because obviously someone's going to pick cat or cat 1 or something like that.
We're going to see a lot of people change their password to cat after this webinar.
I know.
You got to change it up.
Yeah. So we do that. Like our minimum when we do administrator password resets, and we do a random one, but it's a minimum. We set in between 28 and 35 characters for administrator passwords, and like it's a random. Like I'm just like, guys, roll the dice, pick whichever one you want, but it has to be between 28 and 35, or 28 and 38. Because
path phrases also good.
Yeah, because if someone knows you have a 28 character password and it's 28 characters, then it shortens the guesses that they can have, right? So always keep them guessing.
Yep, absolutely.
So Cat Summer 2023, yes.
Explanation point. You got to remember, because we're diving right into this next setting with complexity requirements.
Yeah.
So at least one explanation point in every single password. Is that the fair assumption? So password must meet complexity requirements. Roddy, again, is this something you're enforcing? Is this something you educate on? Is it good enough just to have one explanation point, or are you encouraging to put it in a different place or additional? I mean, how does this conversation go?
Look, I pick my battles. And I'm like, I put the exclamation point wherever you feel it's comfortable with. Like you put it at the end, you put it at the end. I'm just happy you're doing it. Like we go back to like, how do you communicate with the client? Like if you make the requirements too harsh for them, right? You're gonna spin your tires and fighting with them, right? But like at least have some kind of bare minimum for them. So yeah, we do enforce pretty much everything. Special characters, upper, lowercase, complexity. It can't be a common word, can't be a part of your username, things like that. But you don't want to be like, hey, you can't use exclamation point, or you have to use 4 special characters or things like that. Like you gotta
choose
pick
your battles.
You really gotta choose your battles there, right?
And it can be frustrating for users, and when they get frustrated, they make bad choices.
Yes.
You don't want to make enemies with the people paying the bills. Unless you have to. There are reasons, right?
Sometimes
there's definitely reasons.
Sometimes you do have some requirements, right? We have some DoD clients, and you have to be like, you have to do it, right? It's either that or you might go to jail. That's fine. Like it's you. Jail might be beautiful this time of year. I don't know.
Jail is not beautiful this time of year. Encourage everyone to do a good password policy.
Thank you. I thought someone was going to push back on that one. Yeah, I say the same thing though. Like, you have requirements sometimes and you have to meet them. Sometimes they're harsh, but if you don't have to, just, don't let perfection be the enemy of good enough.
That's a perfect way to conclude on that one.
Yeah,
all right, 2 more benchmarks to dive into before we do some Q&A. So if there are any questions. So relax minimum password length limits. We were just talking about 14 character, length is what we're looking for, but this GPO was always confusing to me whenever I passed it. Rich, could you kind of dive into this a little bit?
Sure. What that's really saying is relaxing the minimum password length actually allows you to do a longer password, which is nice. So if organizations do want to use like a passphrase approach, which I like, or just a very long random password system generated, perhaps, if you have a way of managing those, it allows you to get up to, say, that 35 character password or something that can be really nice if you're able to manage that in your operation. So relaxing the minimum password length allows you to do a longer and more complex password.
Yep. That's spot on. It allows Roddy to have that 28 to 38 character minimum for admins.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Keeping this rolling. We finally are at a CIS benchmark setting with this next one. Ensure store passwords using reversible encryption is set to disabled. This one does not impact the end user. We can just do this, right?
Yeah. It's and your slide says it best. It's for legacy, and if you're really about security, unless you're running some old Cobalt stuff, please, please
on the last one,
don't disable, don't set this to enabled. It's not what it says it does. You don't need a reversible encryption. That's for sure on your passwords. Easily reversible encryption. Let me caveat that.
So that's really key, though. What you want to do is you really want to know what that, if you're not sure what that setting means and you just think, well, that sounds good, do just to, pull up the benchmark, because the benchmark will give you what exactly that will do. It'll tell you the impact. It'll tell you the rationale. It'll tell you how to affect the change. So it's a very prescriptive guide. It really takes the guesswork out. Don't just say, well, that sounds good, I'm going to do it. Refer to the benchmark, and then you'll have all the information to make your best choices.
Yep. And I love the image on this slide. You have a secure safe, you got to do 3 digits to get in. You don't know the digit combination, but there's a key slot.
Yep.
If anyone has the key, the password doesn't really matter.
100%. Yeah.
It's almost a basic MFA example there, sort of.
Yeah, if it took both of them, right?
Both are required.
Yep. Awesome. So let's go ahead and go over. This is kind of our concluding slide. We have about 10 minutes left. If there are questions in the comments, I think Henry will pull those up onto the screen. So feel free to type those out. But I do have some example questions for us on the stage here, all really aimed at Roddy. So what factors drive a company to choose how strict their password policy actually should be? Do you just tell them and they listen, or are there other factors?
Yeah. So I mean, first things first: legal, regulatory, and any kind of vendor requirements you might have, right? So we have clients that work with like Target and Best Buy and Walmart, you name them. So like those obviously drive it first, right? Like you have to have those, right? Because either you're going to lose a client or you're going to go to jail or you have to pay some ridiculous fine, right? So like obviously those drive the first.
Not good options.
Yeah. And the second thing is what's best practices, right? So we follow best practices. The third thing is benchmarks. Like, hey, make sure that you're following best practices as prescribed by someone way smarter than you. The third thing is like comfortability, right? Like we can't make it too strict for people, or we're gonna fail the human side of cybersecurity, right? Like we're gonna fail the humans because we're being overly technical and we're being overly strict on it. So again, it's a balance, but you do have to follow some regulatory, some legal means sometimes in certain industries, Department of Defense applications. You do want to follow some kind of framework, some kind of baseline, because defensibility, right? Defensibility of your business as an MSP because you want to continue doing business. Defensibility of your staff so they can follow back on like, hey, this is our policy, right? They don't have to guess it. And they defend it based on your policy. And their jobs, right? Because like if you have something serious happen to your business, it gets a breach. Who's the ones that are affected? It's normally staff, right? They're going to be the ones either fixing it or they're going to be the ones looking for a new job because you've lost enough. And then defensibility of your clients, right? And their ability to defend themselves if something bad happens. So that's defensibility. 100%.
Absolutely. Not everything has to be reactive. If you set up a good barrier, a good baseline, it's going to mitigate so much risk. I mean, that's why we're having these conversations. So the next question, what are common mistakes when implementing a password policy? I mean, you could take this a few ways. Not everyone has Senteon where you can just click a button and implement your password policy, right?
Yeah.
So what are some common mistakes? I mean, I hear a lot about PowerShell, trying to do this with Intune. I mean, what kind of mistakes happen?
Not understanding where everyone's password is, right? How people authenticate. Or do they authenticate locally? Do they authenticate to a domain controller? Is it Azure? Are they authenticating via Facebook? Right? You have to understand all that first, right? Again, we go back to like determining your assets and how people authenticate, things like that. So does that password policy you set on paper, right, and that you tell everyone to sign off on when they onboard, is that being applied across the board to all your assets? That's a major one, right? And B, a manual review, right? You don't have to go check every single account, but like spot check some. So when we used to go do audits, right, you can't check every single financial statement, on a sheet, especially when you're dealing with a $600 million a year budget. But you go sample, right? You take some samples and see if it's being applied correctly, and you have a kind of a reasonable understanding your policy is actually working, right? And again, that's a lot of people miss that. They set the policy in AD and they go, this is good enough, and then they set it and forget it like a Ronco rotisserie.
Not the thing.
It's
continuous motion.
So Roddy, you are a believer that configuration drift can happen. That is a real thing.
100%. Even if you're doing, we do every quarter. We have our TAMs go in and they do a checklist, and there's drift constantly because someone may go check off a box because a partner's trying to log in from Germany and their password's expired. They can't log in, so we just go check that little box off that says, well, never mind. But we never come back. So we never come back to that, and we miss it. And we need something that's going to scream at us that says, hey, this is out of your baseline and you need to go back and fix this, right? Or at least be cognizant that it's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and
having that real-time feedback. Or Rich, you have something to add?
yeah, just one thing I wanted to add too. I mean, if people are giving you a hard time about password policy or, you know, pushing back against change, if you're trying to get to a stronger password set, you know, one thing that I found helpful is like, you know, talk to the individual and, you know, share with them the importance and ask them, I mean, do you want to be the person that is responsible for, you know, letting the bad guys in? I mean, because that's what's at risk. You know, if you don't get on board with this, you're exposing the organization. And, you know, I don't suggest you want to be that guy.
Yeah. You don't want to be the one holding the bag. Let someone else hold that bag.
No,
No.
absolutely.
If
And
the bad guys got in because you personally didn't follow the policy, I don't know. I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And again, that's I go back to that's the difference between having to shell out $300,000 and being shelled
Right
out
on.
$30,000. Right. I'd rather
Right
tell
on.
somebody I didn't properly discuss the risk than saying I didn't discuss the risk at all. Right. That's the difference.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And wrapping up that one segment on configuration drift, I mean, this is critical because this not only is just a drift that's happening, you don't know why it's happening. This could be an indicator of compromise. So plug for myself. I mean, this is where Senteon can come in. Hey, on this host name, it drifted at this timestamp because of this user. It took this long for it to be realigned. You know, these drifts could be an indicator of something malicious, right?
Yeah.
So
what if the drift was 3-letter password?
or the drift occurred at 1 a.m. Like,
yeah, it's like who's changing their password at 1 a.m. right?
Yeah,
so
that's a little odd.
there's these hardened group policies can be so critical to a strong security posture. And I feel today, I mean, this is why I really wanted to share the knowledge that I've learned and created. Is that's why I made the webinar series. It's almost like the forgotten security choice.
Yeah.
So spot on. I think we're gonna do this really quick last question. If you have an answer for it, Roddy, writing down passwords. Do you ever discuss this with anyone, or you just assume it doesn't happen?
I never assume. I mean, like they just keep building. They just keep building a better user, right? Like they no. I mean, I used to go do some physical walkthroughs and I'd flip keyboards over and you'd be like, oh, here's the password. Seriously, that's one of my techniques. You just walk in the office, you start flipping, especially conference room computers. They like to stick them on the bottom. Yeah, I mean, password managers. I mean, we've been preaching password managers the last 2 years. Like, guys, just throw them in there. Get a good one that's going to tell you. I'm pretty agnostic to password managers, but get one that's going to tell you, like, has this password been part of a dark breach? Has it been reused, et cetera, et cetera? And just start. It's behavioral change for people. Sure. It's tough. You know, I would say you can't teach old dog new tricks, but you can surely fence them into an area in the yard that does less damage. So you can and it's just that's part of it, right? So let them use a password manager, introduce a password manager to them. I mean, I've taken a year or so sometimes for people to really start using a password manager.
The two key metaphors I'm going to walk away from this with:
analogy.
chaining them down and letting the tide rise, and then just constraining them to a smaller yard. Yeah. Your metaphors, man, they're a bit dark, but I bet they hit.
I don't pull punches. I don't pull punches.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and go over to a couple of the final slides. So this is a weekly webinar series. So we are doing this on LinkedIn Live every week, and we are actually going to be standardizing the time. So our first 2 episodes, as you're here on a Friday, were on Fridays. We're switching this to Wednesdays at 1 p.m. A little bit of a better time. Eat your lunch, hop on in. Next week, we will be talking about account lockout policy with Rafi from Triada Networks. And after that, we're going to be jumping over to user rights assignments with Ken Murr. So please definitely continue to like the invites, join the page. And we did start a newsletter as well, CIS Unlocked, the benchmarks. So please definitely go ahead and subscribe to that. It's at the top of the comments in this live feed if you don't know where to find it. Otherwise, head over to my profile and it is featured at the top. I'll be doing a recap and an overview of what to look forward to in the next week's webinars. Lastly, going to wrap up in next steps. Connect with us. Roddy, Rich, myself, we're all very active on LinkedIn. That's how we realistically all got together and met. So Would love for you guys to connect. If you do want to be a guest on the show, shoot me an email directly. And if you are looking to implement the CIS benchmarks directly with Senteon or Secure Suite, you reach out to Rich, or using Senteon, go straight over to the QR code. We do have a free sign up to our cross-compliance mapping database. It allows you to do free gap assessments and everything to check your security posture and that baseline against the real-time current statuses. To wrap up, we are going to be launching a Discord community within the next 2 weeks. So this will be a community for IT security professionals to talk about configurations, best practices, what configurations may be more difficult, and may disrupt certain software. So definitely stay tuned. A lot more coming out of the series. And thank you, everyone, for all the support.
Thanks, everybody, for joining.